On the ground in Libya, forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi have been launching multiple airstrikes on Ras Lanuf, an oil city in the east of the country. Dozens of people are reported killed and oil facilities have been set on fire. In Egypt, the army has detained several people after armed men clashed with protesters in Cairo's Tahrir Square. Demonstrators say some supporters of the ousted president, Hosni Mubarak, stormed their camp with knives, machetes and rocks. Witnesses also reported sounds of gunfire at the scene. Meanwhile, the death toll from Tuesday night's clashes in Cairo between Muslims and Christians has risen to 13 people. The casualties were on both sides. 140 other people were wounded. That violence was prompted by further protests, or has prompted rather, further protests from the Coptic Christians in Cairo. And Egypt's opposition figure and Nobel laureate Mohamed El-Baradei has confirmed he will run for president in this year's elections. He'll be up against the outgoing Arab League chief Amr Moussa.
I intend to run for elections as soon as the door for voting is open. I will work from now, and it is my intention to run for office.
A court in Tunisia has dissolved the party of the ousted president Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. The Constitutional Democratic Rally, or RCD, was suspended last month, pending the court's ruling. The U.S. state of Wisconsin has passed a controversial bill on labor rights. Public sector union workers have now been stripped of almost all their collective bargaining powers. Those are the main headlines. The news will continue here on Al Jazeera in half an hour after Riz Khan.
Hello and welcome. Has it become normal for Americans to fear Muslims as fanatics? And if so, what has driven this blind prejudice and intolerance? Could there actually be some foundation for those fears based on the repeated actions of extremists in the United States?
As a matter of fact, I know quite a few Marines who will be very happy to help these terrorists to an early meeting in paradise.
The most popular name in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, this was in the news this week, for babies this year was Muhammad. Am I a racist to feel I'm alarmed by that? Because I am.
Islam is a violent, I would say religion, but it's not a religion. It's a political system. It's a violent political system bent on the overthrow of the governments of the world and world domination.
Well, for the first time in U.S. history, at least 15 states have either approved or introduced bills banning Sharia law, the Islamic legal code. In Tennessee, a proposed bill could make it a felony, punishable by up to 15 years in jail, for Muslims to perform everyday religious practices like praying, giving to charity or fasting, because that would be defined as banned Sharia practices. Also on Thursday, congressional hearings will start looking at the so-called radicalization of Muslims in the U.S. So on today's show we ask, has the American Muslim community become the target of a political witch hunt in the post-9/11 era? Remember, you can join our conversation by sending an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, joining us from California is the renowned Muslim intellectual Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. After the 9/11 attacks in the US, Sheikh Hamza emerged as a respected Islamic scholar advising both the White House and the Arab League. In recent years, he's focused his teachings on countering the widening gap between the Muslim world and the West. He's also the founder and chairman of the Zaytuna Institute based in California. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, good to have you on the show again.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Well, first of all, I want to refer to those sound bites from the opening of the show. You heard a number of people, obviously some clear prejudices there, and I wonder, what is it that allows people in the US to talk about Islam in this way, and yet if it had been any other religion they'd been talking about, there would have been quite an outcry?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think Bill Maher on a regular basis says things that anybody else, had they said them about any other group, say, for instance, Jews or blacks or other minorities or even religious groups, they would have lost their job by now. But I think it shows you the extent of the acceptable nature of just being anti-Arab, being anti-Muslim. So, you know, unfortunately, it's deeply disturbing for those of us who have families who, for instance, many people's wives wear traditional clothing when they go out, or at least a head covering with Western style clothing. But increasingly, we're seeing this antagonism in the United States. And I think it's a result of many, now since 9/11, it's been just unrelenting attacks on talk radio, an incredible number of books that have come out against Islam. One of the things, and I think Pat Robertson displayed that in his statement just now, that this idea that Islam somehow is an ideology, that it's a political system as opposed to being a world religion. And right. I think 1,400 years of Islamic history completely denies that ridiculous assumption.
Let me get an email to you, if I may, that came in from South Africa, from Cape Town. And Cameron Peter wrote in saying, have Muslims replaced the Cold War communist bogeyman in the American psyche?
You know, it's a good point. I think there was a book written, John Stockwell, a former CIA operative, wrote a book called In Search of Enemies. And one of the things that we've noted in the United States is, despite the declining purchasing power of the dollar, despite the spiraling debt, the one sacred cow of the American deficit or budget is military spending. And military spending is actually at Cold War numbers, and if you adjust it for inflation, it's quite stunning what's happened, and that's all been justified by the war on terror. More people died in the United States last year from dog bites than died from terrorist attacks. Less than 3 people. Many of these attacks, in fact, according to the FBI, are actually done by fundamentalist Christians against abortion doctors and things like that. So I think there's just an immense overblown aspect to this whole thing that to me is deeply troubling, because I think things get very distorted. They call it the media magnifying glass that can really distort a threat or distort some statistical insignificance out there into something very significant.
Now, of course, we've got 15 states here in the US targeting Sharia law. What do you see as the consequences of that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's an immense amount of misunderstanding about what Sharia is. There are only 2 sections in any traditional text on sacred law that deal with governance, and that only involves government agencies. They're called Ahkam al-Sultaniya. Sharia is mostly about purification, about prayer, about fasting, about paying your zakat, a poor tax, to help the poor and disenfranchised. That is the bulk of the Sharia. The idea that you have to enact laws in the United States to prevent Sharia from being established or enacted is absurd, because the Constitution of the United States already states that that is the basis of the law of the land. So anything that is from Sharia that would be considered unconstitutional is ipso facto unacceptable in the United States. And I think to me, one of the interesting things about this is that one area that is applicable in the United States is Islamic commercial law that prohibits a lot of the financial instruments that are out there causing devastating effects on Americans. And I think it's very interesting that certainly the bankers would not want that aspect of Islam to become widespread knowledge.